Walls of Glass by J.W. Elliot. Narrated by Benjamin Fife. To all those who suffer from discrimination of any kind, may your burden be lightened. Content warning. This book explores the difficult and highly contentious issues of race and class. Consequently, racial slurs do appear in the book, including the N-word. None of the ideas or attitudes expressed or portrayed in this book should be construed to represent the attitudes or views of the author. This is a work of fiction. Chapter 1. The Plague of a Pooch. I blame it on the dog. He came out of nowhere, trailing a cloud of red dust. He zipped past the third baseman and launched himself through the air. I was halfway to first base before I realized he had caught my beautifully placed fly ball. The only thing I could think was, does that count as an out? I ran through first base just in case, choking on the rust-colored dust that turned my sweat to red glue. A rattle of laughter came from the bleachers as the shortstop and left fielder chased the stupid dog around. I walked back to first base and stood there like a dope, trying to decide if I should run to second or wait for them to tear the ball from the dog's mouth. One coach waved me over and pointed to the bleachers. "Take a seat," he said from around a cheek full of tobacco. I dropped onto an open space on the bleachers behind the dugouts and scowled. I thought I'd done a good job reading how the pitcher always followed his fastball with a slider. I was the first kid to get on base for a while. That should count for something, even if a mangy old black and white dog tried to eat my fly ball. I glanced around at the mixture of white, black, and Hispanic boys, bursting with energy and eager to strut their stuff. The lanky black kid I sat next to stared at me with an expression that said he wanted to squash me like a bug. Two other black kids turned around to glare at me, and I realized I had made a big mistake. Apparently, scrawny white boys weren't supposed to sit next to the black kids. I hesitated for just a second, unsure what I was supposed to do, until the lanky black kid jerked his thumb to tell me to get out of there. I acted like I remembered something important, and hurried away to sit by a fat white kid. My backside barely touched the bench before he shoved me off. I hit the dirt with a grunt. "Place is saved," he said. The Stillwater, Oklahoma Welcoming Committee must have forgotten to send out the memo about love thy neighbor as thyself. I gave up with the kids and went over by the adults, who clustered around the coaches because I figured the adults at least would be civilized. One guy with a big belly and a clipboard spit tobacco juice on my shoe and called me boy. He actually spit on my shoe. What kind of jerk does that? I wiped the spittle off in the dirt, but I just created a long red streak. Some kids whispered behind their hands and snickered when someone pointed at my sneakers. A group of them laughed. Well, my sneakers were old and getting thin, but I had a nice tear in one that let the air blow through so my foot didn't get so hot. All the other boys had cleats. I tried to act like I didn't notice their sneers. I was new and only 12 years old. What else could I do? The scruffy old dog padded around, panting and dripping slobber on everyone he could reach. He nosed right up to me like he thought I might be nice to him since he caught my ball. I could see the coaches looking at me sideways, so I shoved the dog away. I didn't want them thinking it was my dog and disqualify me because the pooch had been running around the ball field, getting in the way. When they called me to the field again, the stupid dog followed me out. I kicked dirt at him and had to wrestle him for the grounder that came my way. I got it, but the kid kept running and made it to third base before I could chuck the ball to home to stop him. That didn't seem too fair since they pulled me out when the dog caught my ball. Some adults stalked out and collared the dog, dragged him off the field, and tied him to a post. Every time a ball came my way, that dog set to howling like a cat was chewing on his tail. He started up again as a grounder bounced toward me. I caught it in my glove and chucked it to first base, but the dog kept howling. "Shut up!" I yelled, and everybody turned as one to stare at me. By the time they ran us through our paces, I had developed a terrible urge to slap that mangy mutt on the nose for ruining my tryouts. I dropped on the wooden bleachers, boiling in my own sweat, while they called the A team, and the B team, and the C team. My name was the last one called for the D team. The boys filed off to their respective teams, while I sat and watched them go. Most of those D-team kids couldn't even hit the ball, let alone catch one. And all the black kids were placed on the C and D teams, no matter how good they were. I watched the entire tryout, and I knew for a fact that a lot of those black kids played better than most of the white kids on the A and B teams. But what did I know? The dog knocked over a trash can and poked his nose into the mess. He trailed a frayed piece of rope he must have chewed through. I glared at the dog. It was his fault. He raised his head to look at me, and I snatched up a dirt clod and chucked it at him. The punk dog caught it in his mouth and wagged his tail like he thought I wanted to play. My brother Clint had been right. No new kid would catch a break, especially not one harassed by a dirty old flop-eared dog. It's not like I expected to be on the A team, but the D team was downright insulting. Kicking a dirt clod with my air-conditioned shoe, I stuffed my glove under my arm and slid my hands into my pockets. My head bent under the sweltering Oklahoma heat. I shuffled off toward home. "Didn't I say you'd be wasting your time?" Clint said from behind the new Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back comic book. He reclined on a pile of boxes in our bedroom. It was the summer of 1980, and Star Wars fever was running high. My experience at the ballpark showed me that galactic battles raged in more places than the movie theaters. I wiped the red dirt from my baseball glove and oiled it before dropping it back into its box. The lingering smell of oiled leather gave me a pang of regret. I loved baseball, and that wretched, stinking dog had ruined it all for me. "No new kid was going to get on a decent team," Clint said. He lowered the comic book into his lap. "This isn't Idaho." Thick brown hair fell in front of his eyes. His jeans had holes in the knee that let his pale, white skin show through. He was cool, and a lot smarter than me. "They put you on the worst team, didn't they?" I grunted. Last year, my little league team had been undefeated. I played left field, and I could chuck a ball all the way to home plate from the outfield fence, but I didn't want to talk about it. Clint gave me a knowing look, so I escaped back outside into the purgatory of heat. I couldn't lounge in front of the air conditioner where Clint would rub my nose in my failure. The earth shimmered as the heat waves rolled over me. Even the insects complained. They buzzed and whined. The grass struggled to grow, and the streets in town were paved with cement because asphalt would have melted. Idaho may not have been the Garden of Eden, but Oklahoma sure felt like Hades. No matter how many clothes you stripped off, the only cool place in the entire state was right in front of the air conditioner, or maybe a swimming pool, but we didn't have one of those. Why did we have to move 1,300 miles to a house filled with mice? A house with yellowed grass in the front lawn, and nothing but dirt and bugs in the back. The grass crunched underfoot as I headed for the cement road. The heat burned right through the bottom of my sneakers. Even the wind breathed hot against my face. I moped all the way to the shabby little park at the end of the street, and sat on a swing that hung from rusty chains, wishing yet again that I could go back to Idaho. At least I had friends there. Here, I had stepped into an alien universe where even the bugs played by different rules. I wasn't going to complain out loud. Dad went to school so he could get a better job, and Mom worked full-time to keep food on our table and a roof over our heads. Still, making friends wasn't easy. It always happened the same way. The new kid showed up in a town where all the kids had known each other since they were getting their diapers changed, and he was supposed to squeeze right into all that history. These kids had been playing together, going to school together, fighting with each other, and in some cases, kissing each other, for years. There was nothing they didn't know about one another. Just saying hi to someone could drop you smack dab in the middle of a civil war that had been raging from the time they were slobbering on the same toys in preschool. As the new kid, the only sensible thing to do was to keep your head down and your mouth shut until you figured out who the local Darth Vader was and where Obi-Wan Kenobi hung his jacket. Once you had that worked out, you could try to find the normal kids that inhabited the star systems in between, preferably closer to Obi-Wan. That wasn't so easy either, because all those normal kids had been watching the galactic battles raging for 12 years. They learned to mind their own business and to be wary of strangers. How did they know I wasn't some psychopath sent to draw them to the dark side? It took a while before people even noticed you were alive. Then it was another month or two before you could talk to each other because no one wanted to be the first one to break the ice. I tried that once after our last move to Idaho, and I got punched in the mouth for it. I knew all this, and I went to the baseball tryouts anyway. I squinted up at the raging sun that tried to bake me where I sat, swinging back and forth on the creaky swing set. It got warm in Idaho, but nothing like this. I don't know if the earth came closer to the sun in Oklahoma or what, but the sun down here could be downright dangerous. I thought my brain would boil. Something warm and wet touched my hand. I jerked with a shriek and flopped from the swing into the dirt. I expected some monster Oklahoma bug to be crawling up my arm. Instead, a soggy baseball dropped on my stomach and rolled to the ground. The mangy dog panted over me. How had he found me? And why did he still have a baseball? Didn't this dog have an owner? "Get out of here!" I shouted. The dog bounced away and crouched low with his tail wagging. He barked. I grabbed up the slimy ball he had dropped and sprang to my feet. I chucked it away. The dog raced after it. I ran out onto a rickety bridge that spanned a creek with deep cutaway banks to find a place to hide from the dog. The creek sliced through the park to disappear into a tangle of willows and brush that lined its banks. I leaned on the rails and peered down at the sorry excuse for a stream. The floor of the creek was muddy with a trickle of water slithering through it like a snake that was too hot to move. I scrambled down the muddy bank and stood at the edge. The creek smelled like an old garbage can with a rotten cat tossed in. If the temperature hadn't dropped by at least 20 degrees in the shade, I might have left. For that kind of relief, I could endure the stench of a dead cat for a while. At least until the dog left me alone. Creeks have a way of accumulating the leftover trash of the lives they pass through. I found stuff down there that must have washed up from the 19th century. Boots that could have been worn by General Custer, bottles, shopping carts, bags of trash, dead opossums, and the biggest snapping turtles I had ever seen. I nearly stepped on one the size of a car tire. My whole leg could have fit into its mouth. He glared at me with beady black eyes like he wanted to eat me. He snapped his beak, and I jumped halfway out of my skin, putting some real distance between me and the monster turtle. I wasn't used to this kind of stuff. The turtles in Idaho were cute and tiny. You could take them home and make pets out of them. I gave that monster turtle all the room he wanted and kept walking. Maybe the snapper would eat the dog if he came down here after me. That was when I saw the wallet, shoved up under the edge of a rock and half covered in mud. Chapter 2. The Wallet of Destiny. Man, what a wallet! It lay half open, inviting me to pick it up. Dozens of green bills bulged from the pocket. I shoved the rock aside and snatched the wallet from the stinking mud. The stack of bills packed inside that thing could have fed my family for months, maybe years. I looked around in case the owner was looking for it, but I couldn't see anyone. I peeled the soggy pocket open. When I pulled on the paper driver's license, it ripped. The mushy paper tore free and fell into the mud. I picked up the pieces and tried to see who owned the wallet, but the ink was so smudged from the water or stained by the mud, all I could read was the name. Damon. The paper crumbled. Maybe I should have left the license alone and dried the wallet first, but it was too late now. A bark rang up the creek. I glanced up to see the dog staring down at me. He picked up the ball he had set on the bridge. "Geez, what's wrong with you?" I shouted. "Get out of here!" He dropped the ball into the creek and barked again. I strode over, picked it up, and threw it as hard and as far as I could. The dog took off with his claws scraping over the wooden bridge. I thought I heard a bang and a crash, but I was too distracted by the wallet. I stuffed the wallet and the pieces of the license into my pocket and scurried for home before that dumb dog could find me again. All the way there, I tried to convince myself that this Damon guy didn't need all that cash, or he wouldn't have lost it. This wasn't any different than me picking up a $20 bill I found blowing around in the gutter, was it? My family could use the money. Dad was working a part-time job while he tried to get a doctorate degree. Mom worked herself ragged, trying to raise a family with 6 kids, while still holding down a full-time job. Life was hard for my parents. I wanted to buy a new trumpet for band so I didn't have to play one of those dented pieces of metal I rented from the school. They all sounded more like an elephant with asthma than a trumpet. Mom needed new shoes for work. I could think of a million things to buy with all that cash. I was still reeling from the apparent good luck of finding a soggy wallet packed with bills when I got home. Things like that just never happened to me. I locked myself in the bathroom and pulled out the lump of waterlogged bills to count them. They were cold and damp, and still had the rich, dizzying smell of new money, despite the moldy stink they picked up in the creek. Ben Franklin stared right up at me like he was congratulating me on the first good luck I'd ever had. Damon had $3,026 in his wallet. I had never seen that much money in one place before in my life. Maybe I could buy a silver Ford Mustang. The look and smell of that stack of green bills were making me crazy. Only after I counted and recounted the bills did I bother to look for more identification. I hoped I wouldn't find any because by now that money had cast its spell on me. Everything was so wet and stuck together that I couldn't salvage much. There was a picture of a white guy in a suit with a bow tie, and another one of a chubby, dark-skinned baby girl with a pink bow in her hair. Damon had a tiny picture of a football team, but there was no other identification. I tried to piece together the driver's license again, but the paper had crumbled even more in my pocket. There hadn't been a photo on the license, which told me it was old. My dad had come home just yesterday with his new license, and told us that photos were now mandatory in Oklahoma. He passed his license around so we could all make jokes about how he looked like a criminal without his glasses. I sat on the toilet lid with the bills and pictures spread out on the sink, trying to decide what I should do. I knew what I should do, but did I want to do it? I decided to ask Mom. Someone banged on the bathroom door and I jumped. "Dude, are you growing roots?" my big brother yelled. "Other people need to use the bathroom." He tended to exaggerate when it came to bathroom time. I hadn't been in here more than a few minutes. Arguing with him would only cause trouble, though, and right now I didn't need any more of that. I stuffed the wallet into my pocket and yanked the door open just as he prepared to pound again. "About time," he said, and pushed past me. Mom scurried around in the kitchen getting dinner ready. I had been smart enough to wash my hands and clean the mud off my clothes, so she wouldn't suspect I had been places I shouldn't be. She smiled at me. "How did the tryouts go?" I shrugged. "I'm not playing." She cocked her head in surprise. "But you love baseball." "Not if they're going to stick me on the D team with all the goof-ups who don't even know which end of the bat to hold." She gave me that, "oh, you poor thing" look. Mom had 6 children. After all those kids, her face might have slipped into a permanent frown. She might have developed that wild and worn-out look you often saw on the ladies at the supermarket, who wrestle their kids away from the candy bars. But she hadn't. Mom was pleasant and quick to smile. Her curly brown hair made her look like a dark-haired version of Shirley Temple. "When the coaches see how good you are, they'll move you up," she said. I shook my head. "Well, maybe next year," she said. "Yeah," I said, but I wasn't interested in baseball anymore. A war was raging inside of me. My heart craved that pile of cash. I could feel the cold, damp bills in my hands. I knew I should tell someone, so I opened my mouth to tell my mom about the wallet, but the wrong words came out. "Is it wrong to keep money you find lying around in the street?" I dropped my gaze to the floor before Mom could look at me. I didn't want her to see the struggle behind my eyes.
"If you know who it belongs to, you should return it," she said. "But if it was just blowing in the gutter, there's not much you can do."
A pot clanged on the stove, and I stole a glance at her. She wasn't looking at me.
"I'm sure you'll do the right thing," she said.
"Okay," I said, but Mom had only made things worse. If I did the right thing, I wouldn't be able to buy her a new car and new shoes. If I told her now, she would freak out at the sight of all that money and call the police. They might arrest me for stealing the wallet, even though I had only found it. If I turned the money into them, they would just keep it instead of trying to find out who it belonged to. There had to be a better way. I wandered into the front room, clicked on the radio, and dropped onto the couch as Journey's song, "Any Way You Want It," burst from the speakers. I stared at the wall, trying to convince myself that 3,026 wasn't any different than $5. Even the ancient law of finders keepers, losers weepers was on my side. By the time the song ended, I had given up the struggle. Though it hurt me more than I can say, I decided to take the wallet back and leave it for a few days to see if the owner would come looking for it. Since I didn't want to risk losing the money, I pulled the bills out and slipped in a note that said, "I found your money. If you want it back, call this number." I rounded the corner before the park and found a black and white police car pulled up in front of the playground. A blue uniformed policeman stood talking to a bunch of kids by the swings. A brown car with a smashed windshield parked by the curb. The cop wore a pistol on one hip and a billy club on the other. The mangy old dog sat on its haunches beside the police officer with a dirty ball between his paws. I was busted. Chapter 3. Busted. The cops were already looking for me. Somebody must have seen me take the wallet and called the police. I stared at the police officer's gun for just a moment before my 12-year-old brain betrayed me completely. Instead of walking up to him and explaining what happened, I turned and ran. How did I know somebody from the baseball tryouts wasn't trying to frame me for some crime I didn't commit by sending that dog after me? Maybe the wallet had been planted there just so I would find it and pick it up. No matter what I said, they would accuse me of stealing the money. Who would believe the new kid in town? If I showed them the remains of the driver's license, they would just say I destroyed it so I could claim the money. I raced back to the house, faster than I had ever run around the bases on a ball field, telling myself all the way to calm down. Nobody saw me. They couldn't know I had the wallet. I was just being paranoid. I pounded into our front yard just as Dad pulled into the driveway. He passed a hand over his balding head and jammed a thumb toward the back seat. "Hop in." Clint burst through the front door like he had expected Dad, and we clambered into the back seat. My heart still raced 1,000,000 miles a minute, and I just about tossed the wallet into Dad's lap and blubbered out a confession, but I was too winded and too scared even to do that. I just sat there, slumped down below the window so the cops couldn't see me, and imagined what life on the run from the law would be like. Maybe if I took the wallet back in the morning, no one would know the difference. I could just sneak out before Mom made us unpack, and I would stuff it back under the rock. If no one came for it after a week or two, I could call the police and tell them I found it. Then they would let me keep the money. Now that I had a plan, I thought I'd be able to relax. But I couldn't. I kept sneaking little peeks out the rear window to see if the police were chasing us. Since our family had so many kids, we couldn't afford a van or a Suburban. We owned a long green station wagon that rumbled down the street like a tank. It wasn't a nice shade of green either. Mom called it lime green, but the rest of us called it puke green. I couldn't help but think the wad of cash I had hidden in my room could have purchased a nicer car for my family. Dad drove us to the Stillwater newspaper office, where we applied to work as paperboys. I guess they needed help in a bad way because we both left with jobs that started the next day. Delivering papers wasn't anything new to me. I had started delivering the morning paper in Buell when I turned 10 years old. That night, I dreamed a pack of carnivorous turtles was nibbling at my nose and toes. I threw $100 bills to scare them away, but they just gobbled them up. Then the monster turtle waddled over, grabbed my whole foot in his mouth, and started to swallow me alive. I woke up to find my brother Clint yanking on my foot. "Get up," he said. "Mom wants these boxes unpacked before the picnic." I threw my pillow at him, which was a mistake, and I knew better. We had feather pillows that turned hard as a rock if you wadded the feathers up on one end. Clint grabbed up the pillow with a look of pure evil in his eye, shook all the feathers to the end, wrapped the rest around his hand, and slammed it into my head so hard he rattled my teeth. Man, that gave me a major headache. "Get up," he said as he brandished the feather club. "I'm not doing this all by myself." I raised my hands in surrender. Pillow fights with Clint never went my way. I rolled off the bed and crawled to the boxes. The wallet would have to wait. Unpacking was worse than packing. Where did we get all that junk? Dad must have had 1,000,000 books. Mom had at least that much in canned food. And Clint and I lugged all the boxes around and unpacked them. My little brothers and sister were too small to do much but get in the way. Mom and my older sister, Dawn, cleaned the kitchen, making sure everything got put in the right place. That's when the gray mouse sprang out of a box of peaches. Chapter 4. Death Wish. The mouse froze in terror for just an instant as it locked eyes with Mom. I don't know which was more terrified, but I knew which one screamed the loudest. Mom's shriek rang in my ears. It kept coming and coming. The mouse had to know its days were numbered because it leapt off the box and hit the floor in a long skid that sent it careening into the wall. It scrambled for traction as it whirled and headed for the corner. By this time, Mom was hopping up and down from foot to foot. If she could have pulled it off, she would have clawed her way to the top of the fridge. I sprang after the mouse, trying to stomp on it, but it was too fast. It hit the corner just before my foot did, and headed right back towards Mom. She shrieked louder and louder, each shriek going up in pitch, until I thought my eardrums would explode and the windows would shatter. Then the mouse scampered right up Mom's pant leg. I thought she might faint or die or something. The little lump squirmed up her pant leg while she jumped up and down, screaming bloody murder. I guess the mouse figured since it had already taken the plunge, it might as well get in as deep as it could. But Mom wasn't having it. She got a murderous look on her face. She slammed her hand on the mouse and squeezed. Once she had a hold of him, she didn't let go. She screamed and squeezed and squeezed and screamed. I stared in shock and disbelief for an entire minute, while Mom kept up a little wiggling jig of terror, punctuated by a shriek every time the leg with the mouse on it hit the floor. By this time, she had an audience. The entire family had gathered in the kitchen.
"Honey,"
Dad spoke real soft and gentle, the way he sometimes did to my little sister. Mom looked at him with a wild expression, like she had lost her mind.
"Honey?"
he said again. "It's probably Dad." Mom glanced down at her hands and stopped dancing. A wet stain was spreading from her pants. She uncurled her fingers from the mouse-sized bulge in her pant leg, sucked in her breath, and looked away. Dad peeled the rumpled cloth away from the wet lump and shook it. Mom gritted her teeth and grabbed the counter. Her knuckles turned white.